The Chariot, a masterclass in psychological growth. When someone looks at the Chariot in the tarot deck, it's easy to fixate on the majestic armor, the crown, or those wild, opposing horses. But this card isn't just about moving forward, it's about how we move, why we move, and what's driving that motion from within. That Chariot? It's not just a war machine, it's a symbolic vehicle for the psyche. A metaphor for our inner journey toward individuation, where ego and spirit meet, clash, and ultimately seek alignment. Picture a young king at the wheel, not a tyrant, but a seeker, learning the ropes of power, purpose, and direction. Now, what kind of chariot would you build if you were crafting one from your life experiences? Would it be a sleek sports car fueled by ambition, or a clunky wagon weighed down by other people's expectations? The beauty of this archetype is that it invites you to take the reins, not just of your outer life, but of the inner wild ride happening behind your thoughts. The Chariot reminds us that true direction doesn't come from GPS or mentors shouting from the sidelines. It comes from within, from that subtle voice of the higher self whispering amid chaos. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's a reason the driver is still young. This isn't about mastery, not yet. It's about initiation. Just like in mythology, where the hero sets out before fully understanding the path ahead, the Chariot represents that pivotal moment where we start asking, who am I really? It's raw, unpolished, and sometimes a little reckless. And that's okay, because in symbolic travel, the messy beginning is often the most honest part of the journey. Take a second to reflect. Are you actually steering your life, or are you being pulled by unconscious patterns disguised as choices? That's where the red and blue horses come in. They represent inner duality, instinct versus aspiration, shadow versus light. If you're constantly feeling like you're being dragged in different directions, it's probably because you're not holding the reins. Journaling, active imagination, or dream work can help clarify who's really driving. You might be surprised to find your inner charioteer is still learning to read the map. This card is a call to motion, but not just any motion. It's not about running away or speeding toward some illusion of success. It's about conscious motion, direction with depth. And when you finally stop mistaking movement for progress, something magical happens. The psyche begins to unfold, revealing layers of symbolic meaning you never thought to look for. And that takes us right into the heart of the next journey, where outer travel and inner transformation start to reflect each other in surprising and sometimes uncomfortable ways. Inner and outer journeys. Every road trip you've ever taken, every plane ride, every new city, it all reflects something deeper happening inside. That's the beauty of the Chariot in the tarot. It's not just about external movement, it's about the symbolic journey of the psyche. We travel not only through the world, but through ourselves. When someone leaves home for the first time, it's not just a physical departure. It's a psychic shift, a push into the unknown territories of the unconscious. Every detour, delay, or unexpected encounter becomes part of this inner initiation, if we're paying attention. The tricky part? Most people think the transformation is happening out there. They chase thrills, new landscapes, exotic foods, thinking these things alone will awaken something within. But unless you're also confronting your own fears, wounds, and blind spots, all you're really doing is sightseeing. The Chariot doesn't just gallop across continents. It dives into memories, emotional triggers, and unconscious patterns. That breakup, that failed job interview, that weird dream about a sinking ship, these are the real landscapes of transformation. Let's get practical. Want to make your outer journey more meaningful? Bring a journal on your next trip. After each day, write down what challenged you, what surprised you, what mirrored something inside. Did a stranger make you feel seen? Did a delay at the airport bring up old anxieties? That's shadow work on wheels. You don't need a mountaintop retreat or a monastery. You just need mindfulness and a willingness to connect the dots between what's happening outside and what it's awakening within. That's the real alchemy of symbolic travel. When the streets of Rome echo your longing for structure, when a walk through Tokyo mirrors your internal chaos, when camping under the stars brings up forgotten dreams. The Chariot teaches us that the world is a mirror. Every bump in the road reflects the bumps in our psyche. Every fork on the path is a chance to choose not just where we go, but who we become along the way. And no GPS can chart that terrain. So next time you feel the urge to pack a bag and run towards something or away from something, pause. Ask yourself, am I chasing a location or a lesson? The outer world can teach you so much, but only if you're open to hearing the inner echoes. And that, right there, is where the deeper psychological symbolism of the Chariot begins to align perfectly with what Jung saw in the individuation process. Jungian interpretation. When Carl Jung explored the path of individuation, he was describing something astonishingly similar to what the Chariot whispers through its imagery. Here's a young ego full of potential, ambition, and confusion, sitting at the helm of a mysterious vehicle. That vehicle is the psyche itself, and it's propelled by forces both conscious and unconscious. Jung saw individuation not as self-improvement, but as integration. And that's exactly what the Chariot symbolizes. The journey toward becoming whole by reconciling opposing parts of the self. What most people don't realize is that the horses pulling this chariot aren't just cool-looking symbols, they're raw forces within us. Think of one as your higher aspirations, and the other as your instincts. One pulls toward spiritual growth, the other toward immediate gratification. Without inner guidance, the chariot crashes. Jung would call this a clash between ego and shadow. And trust me, trying to steer through life without acknowledging the unconscious is like driving blindfolded on a highway. It's not going to end well. Jung believed that the unconscious isn't some dark basement. It's a vast, rich field full of untapped wisdom. The chariot represents the moment we start to tap into that field. Meditation, dream analysis, and even synchronicities start to feel less random and more like messages from the self, Jung's term for the totality of the psyche. The key here is learning to listen. Instead of resisting inner chaos, what if you sat with it? Instead of drowning out discomfort, what if you asked what it's trying to show you? One useful practice? Write down your dreams for 7 nights straight. You don't even have to interpret them at first. Just collect. Patterns will emerge. Symbols will repeat. That's your unconscious reaching out, your inner horses trying to tell you where the real terrain lies. This is the chariot in motion, not through physical space, but through the deep corridors of inner experience. And the more conscious you become of what's really driving you, the less power those unseen forces hold. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. As soon as the ego starts identifying with this inner power, things can go sideways fast. Jung warned that when the ego mistakes itself for the self, we enter dangerous territory. Inflation, arrogance, hubris. And that's when the chariot, once a symbol of integration, starts veering into a cautionary tale. But we'll get to that very soon, as we explore the rich tapestry of symbolic myths that echo through the architecture of the soul. Symbolic architecture and mythic parallels. Now let's zoom out, because the chariot isn't just a tarot card, it's a recurring symbol that's echoed across myth, religion, and mystical tradition. Ever heard of Ezekiel's chariot in the Old Testament? It wasn't just wheels within wheels and flaming visions for show. That celestial vehicle represented divine movement, guided by inner wheels, wheels of perception, transformation, and ascent. The Chariot card taps into this exact same current. It's not about horsepower. It's about spiritual propulsion. In Buddhism, there's the Mahayana, the great vehicle, a path meant to carry beings toward enlightenment with compassion. Again, vehicle. Again, inner motion. The soul moves when it opens to higher wisdom. Or take Apollo, riding his golden chariot across the sky. Light bearer, cosmic rhythm. And of course, there's poor Phaeton, who tried to drive his father's chariot and nearly destroyed the earth. Classic ego inflation. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're psychological case studies in archetypal disguise. So what do all these chariots have in common? They represent the link between realms, between mortal and divine, conscious and unconscious, personal will and cosmic order. The driver is never just a driver. He's a symbol of the ego attempting to channel forces larger than itself. The chariot is the psyche in motion, and its success depends entirely on whether the ego is aligned with its deeper spiritual symbolism or hijacked by fantasy and pride. Want to experience this archetype directly? Pay attention next time you feel guided towards something. Maybe it's a book that randomly appears 3 times in a week. Maybe it's a dream so vivid it lingers for days. That's your Ezekiel moment. That's your Apollo whispering from the sky. Take the hint. Follow the lead, but stay grounded. Use tools like tarot journaling or meditative visualizations to translate myth into movement, not just metaphor. Because every time you climb into your metaphorical chariot, you're echoing something ancient. You're stepping into a line of seekers, mystics, and heroes who learned, often the hard way, that riding toward the divine requires balance, humility, and deep psychological awareness. And that's exactly what becomes crystal clear when we look more closely at the dual nature of the psyche, where instinct and spirit pull in different directions, demanding not conquest, but harmonization. Dual nature of psyche and instincts. Look closely at the 2 horses pulling the chariot, one red, one blue. They're not just decorative. They represent the push and pull inside all of us. On one side, the red horse symbolizes passion, drive, instinct, and the physical world. On the other, the blue horse stands for intuition, stillness, higher thought, and the spiritual realm. Sound familiar? That's because it's you, every day, torn between what feels good now and what's meaningful in the long run. And the chariot? It's your job to steer them without letting either one run wild. It's tempting to pick a side, to become all hustle and grind, or to float in endless meditation and escapism. But here's the catch. Neither horse can carry the chariot alone. Try to suppress your instincts completely, and you'll burn out. Overindulge them, and you'll get stuck in loops of chaos. Jung called this tension the opposites, 2 poles that demand not rejection but integration. The psyche thrives when opposites are in dialogue, not in war. And trust me, peace doesn't mean silence, it means dynamic harmony. Take athletes, for example. The best ones train their bodies, red horse, with discipline and also visualize success, focus on breath, and cultivate mental resilience, blue horse. Same with artists. They tap into the unconscious for inspiration, but also develop technique and structure to bring visions into form. You too can apply this. If you're all action and no reflection, try journaling. If you're lost in your head, try dancing, running, or even cooking, anything that grounds you in the physical. That's real shadow work in action. The chariot reminds us that we are not meant to kill the animal within. We are meant to listen to it, respect its wisdom, and steer it with awareness. That primal energy, that drive to eat, love, fight, survive, isn't the enemy. It's part of your spiritual vehicle. When ignored, it goes rogue. When honored and integrated, it becomes fuel. That's when instinct becomes intuition, and desire transforms into direction. And here's where things get really interesting. That young king holding the reins? He's not just a charioteer, he's the ego ideal. A symbolic figure of hope, leadership, and vision. But also a dangerous illusion when taken too literally. Because sometimes the very thing that guides us forward can become the very thing that leads us astray. The young king as ego ideal. At the center of the chariot sits a young king, confident, armored, eyes fixed on the horizon. But don't be fooled by the crown. This isn't a master of the universe. This is the ego ideal, freshly emerging, full of hope and potential, but still naive to the deeper layers of the psyche. He believes he's in control, believes he understands the road ahead. But underneath that gold-plated confidence, a dangerous innocence. Because when the ego begins to believe it is the king, it forgets it's only part of a much larger kingdom. This ideal self often shows up in our 20s, or any time we reinvent ourselves. You start feeling invincible, like destiny is yours to command. It's seductive. You ace a job interview, fall in love, land that big opportunity, and suddenly you think, I've figured it all out. But life, being the brilliant teacher it is, usually has other plans. That pedestal the ego climbs, it gets shaky fast. One failure, one heartbreak, one crisis, and the young king learns he's been wearing his father's armor all along. There's nothing wrong with aiming high. The ego needs ideals to strive toward. But the chariot warns, don't confuse the image of success with the substance of wisdom. In the inner journey, it's easy to armor up with spiritual language, rituals, and self-help slogans while secretly staying disconnected from the instinctual self. Real leadership doesn't come from posture, it comes from integration. You can't lead your psyche without knowing the terrain. And that terrain includes vulnerability, confusion, and the wild instincts beneath the throne. One powerful exercise: write a letter from your ego to your inner child. Let the king speak, then respond as the part of you that's scared, playful, and raw. You might be shocked at how out of sync they are. That gap is where inflation hides. Bridging it, that's where growth begins. Jung called this kind of inner dialogue essential for individuation. Because when the ego stops pretending it knows everything, it can finally start learning from the unconscious, and that's when true transformation begins. But until that humility kicks in, the young king walks a fine line. One foot in potential, the other in delusion. And when the ego starts mistaking divine guidance for personal superiority, the chariot veers into dangerous terrain. One ancient culture's warned us about again and again through the tragic downfall of those consumed by hubris. Ego inflation and hubris. There's a fine line between confidence and delusion, and the chariot walks it like a tightrope. When the ego starts to believe it is the self, when the young king thinks he's not just driving the vehicle, but embodying divine authority, we step straight into the dangerous realm of hubris. Jung called this ego inflation, and this shows up in real life more often than you'd think. That friend who starts a meditation practice and 2 weeks later is telling everyone how awakened they are. Ego inflation. The spiritual coach who preaches love and unity but can't handle a single disagreement. Inflation. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle, a quiet superiority, a refusal to admit mistakes, a secret belief that we've arrived. But behind it all is the same illusion, mistaking a glimpse of the self for ownership of it. And here's the twist: ego inflation doesn't just come from success. It often follows spiritual insights, mystical experiences, or moments of deep clarity. We touch something sacred, and the ego grabs it, saying mine. But the self can't be possessed. It moves through us like wind, like light. If we try to trap it in our identity, it slips away, and we're left with only the shell of the experience. That's when spiritual pride creeps in, often disguised as enlightenment. Want to keep your ego in check? Practice humility, real humility, not false modesty or self-deprecation, but conscious awareness of your limits. Talk to people who challenge your perspective. Read texts that disrupt your worldview, like the Tao Te Ching or Jung's memories, dreams, reflections. And above all, don't rush the journey. Transformation isn't a race. If your chariot is moving too fast, you're probably outrunning the very lessons meant to shape you. Because the deeper truth is this: ego inflation doesn't just hurt your growth, it blocks it. It creates a glass ceiling in your psyche, where real insight can no longer get through. And if the ego keeps clinging to external validation, refusing to relinquish control, it misses the greatest gift the chariot offers: the transition from dependence on outer authority to true spiritual autonomy. Spiritual autonomy versus external dependence. There comes a moment in every inner journey when the traveler must stop looking outward for answers. The chariot, in its deepest symbolism, represents that pivot from seeking guidance in gods, gurus, and institutions to realizing that the true compass has always been within. This isn't about rejecting teachers or tradition. It's about reclaiming authority. Spiritual autonomy isn't isolation, it's alignment. When the ego finally surrenders its need for applause and approval, the higher self can begin to speak with clarity. Let's be honest, most people start their path clinging to something external. We all do. A religion, a therapist, a partner who grounds us. At first, these can be powerful catalysts. But if we never move beyond them, we remain dependent. It's like training wheels on a bike. They're helpful, but ride with them too long and you'll never learn balance. The chariot invites us to take those wheels off. Not because we're perfect, but because the only way to grow is by trusting our own inner guide, even when it's whispering something scary. Spiritual autonomy feels like this. You meditate not because someone told you to, but because your inner world craves stillness. You say no to a job offer because your body tightens just thinking about it. You walk away from a spiritual teacher because their energy no longer resonates. These aren't acts of rebellion, they're acts of responsibility. You're no longer outsourcing your soul. That's what the chariot is really driving toward. The moment when your decisions are born from insight, not instruction. Want a place to start? Spend 1 week without asking for advice. Instead, journal your dilemmas, sit in silence, and wait. Answers will come. Maybe not as words, but as feelings, images, dreams, subtle nudges from the unconscious. That's spiritual sovereignty in action. It's not always neat, and it's definitely not always comfortable. But it's the only path that leads to real integration. And when the ego finally relinquishes its grip on outer scaffolding, something incredible happens. Inner authority awakens, and the psyche begins to walk upright. But don't expect this transition to happen in isolation. The journey of the chariot echoes through countless heroic tales, not just in sacred texts, but in pop culture and collective myth. Because long before you ever held a tarot deck, these archetypes were already riding through the stories you've loved since childhood. Mythological archetypes and collective imagery. Think back to your childhood heroes, the ones who wore capes, rode white horses, or fought dragons with nothing but a sword and a sense of purpose. Superman, Saint George, samurai warriors. These aren't just stories. They're vessels of ancient psychological truth, echoing the same pattern that the chariot symbolizes: the eternal battle between ego and unconscious forces, and the courageous emergence of the hero within. Myth is the language of the soul, and every time we resonate with a story, something in us remembers who we're meant to become. Take St. George, for instance. Slaying the dragon isn't about violence. It's about confronting the shadow. The dragon is fear, addiction, unresolved trauma, the unknown that sleeps inside your psyche. The sword? That's your awareness, your willingness to face what others run from. Or look at samurai legends, where discipline, honor, and inner harmony take center stage. The real fight is never just against an enemy. It's against imbalance, chaos, and the seduction of ego inflation. Pop culture picks up this thread too. Think of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, initially impulsive and idealistic, slowly confronting the shadow in himself and even in his father. This is the Chariot's narrative, repackaged. The hero isn't someone who wins all the battles. It's someone who learns to navigate the terrain of the self, harmonizing instinct and spirit, passion and purpose. These stories survive because they live in us. They help us see our own unconscious drama projected onto the screen. Want to know what myth is shaping your journey right now? Reflect on the stories or characters that fascinate you most. Are you drawn to the rebel, the savior, the wanderer, the queen? That's not random, it's symbolic. The psyche uses archetypal imagery to guide growth. Pay attention. Read myths. Watch your favorite films again, but this time as mirrors. This kind of symbolic reflection is a powerful spiritual tool. It turns entertainment into initiation. And once you begin to see your life through this mythic lens, you no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" You ask, "What is this asking of me?" That's a radical shift. That's when individuation accelerates. And that's when the fantasy of becoming more becomes a tool for actual transformation, especially when used with conscious imagination rather than escapist shortcuts. Imagination and non-drug-induced visionary experience. Let's talk about imagination, not as child's play, but as sacred technology. In a world obsessed with quick highs and external stimulation, the Chariot reminds us that our deepest visionary experiences don't require psychedelics or exotic rituals. They require presence. Jung saw imagination as a bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious, a place where symbols arise and integration begins. And when used with intention, imagination becomes a chariot itself, carrying us across inner landscapes without needing to alter our chemistry. Don't get it twisted. This isn't about moralism or shaming those who explore altered states. It's about reclaiming the power of a mind in stillness. The fantasy that you can only access your higher self through ayahuasca, LSD, or plant medicine is just that, a fantasy. Your psyche already holds everything you need. The challenge is sitting still long enough to hear it speak. Meditation, active imagination, and deep creative flow can unlock visions as powerful as any trip, without the need for a chemical shortcut. Here's how to try it. Pick a symbol from the Chariot, the horses, the armor, the crown. Close your eyes, breathe, and let that image expand in your mind. Let it morph, move, speak. Don't judge it. Just watch. You'll be amazed at what rises from the depths. This is Jung's technique of active imagination, and it's no small thing. It's how myth becomes alive again, how the unconscious reveals what you're truly wrestling with and what wants to emerge. Metaphor of the Chariot as the psyche in motion. Picture the psyche not as a static structure, but as a flowing process, constantly adapting, shifting, evolving. That's what the Chariot truly symbolizes, the psyche in motion. It's not a fixed identity, not a frozen self-image, but a living, breathing system of thoughts, instincts, desires, dreams, and archetypes. The Chariot itself is your psychological vehicle, built from your habits, your beliefs, your wounds, and your intentions. And like any vehicle, it can either carry you towards self-discovery or drive you straight into a wall. What's powerful about this metaphor is its flexibility. You can tune it, upgrade it, redesign it. Your psyche is not a prison, it's a craft. If your life feels directionless, maybe your wheels are stuck in outdated narratives. If you're overwhelmed, maybe your horses are pulling in opposite directions. Awareness is the fuel. Reflection is the steering. Without those, you're just drifting. But with conscious effort, the chariot becomes a tool of profound transformation, one that turns survival into evolution. Let's ground this in reality. Imagine your psyche like a chariot driven by daily rituals. What you consume, how you speak to yourself, who you surround yourself with, these are the reins. You don't need to overhaul everything overnight. Start small. Switch one reactive habit for a conscious one. Replace endless scrolling with journaling. Replace judgment with curiosity. Each shift turns your chariot slightly toward more wholeness, more presence, more self-alignment. That's what motion with meaning looks like. The chariot teaches us that psyche is never still. Even when you feel stuck, something inside you is shifting. Thoughts are forming. Emotions are being processed. Archetypes are stirring. The key is learning to ride that movement instead of resisting it. When you partner with your inner momentum instead of fighting it, you stop feeling like life is happening to you. You begin to co-create your direction, intuitively, symbolically, and intentionally. And as this motion becomes more conscious, a new quality starts to emerge: courage. Not the reckless kind, but the quiet, steady courage required to look inward, to self-examine, and to live a life shaped by meaning instead of momentum. Because ultimately, the true destination of this chariot ride isn't out there. It's in the choice to examine your life before it races past. Courage and self-examination. Here's the truth: most people avoid themselves. They distract, deflect, and deny. Not because they're lazy, but because self-examination takes real courage, the kind the chariot demands. This archetype isn't just about motion or mastery. It's a call to live deliberately, to stop letting life push you around and start steering with clarity. And clarity only comes when you're willing to look inward and ask the hard questions. Who's driving? What's pulling me? Where am I really going, and why? Self-examination isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong practice, and it doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it means admitting you've been headed in the wrong direction for years. But that moment of recognition, that's everything. That's where growth begins. That's when the ego drops the illusion of control and starts learning how to listen. Not just to mentors or signs or cards, but to the deeper wisdom within your own psyche. The real battle isn't between you and the world. It's between your higher self and your conditioned self. Between the soul's quiet voice and the ego's constant noise. And the only way to hear that voice is to slow down, turn off the autopilot, and actually feel what's going on inside. That kind of courage is rare, but it's what separates those who live symbolically from those who merely react. The chariot doesn't reward speed. It rewards self-alignment. Here's a simple question to ask yourself every morning. What would it look like to live from my center today? Just that. One line. Let it guide your choices. Let it influence how you respond to challenge, how you show up in relationships, how you speak, move, rest. That's what self-examination looks like in motion. It's not about retreating into the mind. It's about letting the inner world shape how you ride through the outer one. Because at the end of the day, the chariot isn't promising victory. It's offering meaning. A way to ride through chaos without becoming it. A way to move forward, not by force, but by alignment. And if you can commit to that, if you can ride with courage, humility, and intention, you won't just move. You'll transform. And transformation, as we're about to see, always begins in the symbols you're willing to truly understand.